Another day, another dollar. You might not think money is something to sing and dance about, but don't worry, that's why I'm here. I'm Julie Beckham, the financial educator at Rockland Trust, and this is Behind the Curtain, Money Made Simple, the podcast that takes the mystery out of money and puts the spotlight on your financial life. If you've ever felt behind, confused, or just totally overwhelmed when it comes to your finances, you are not alone. In fact, you're part of a cast of thousands. So take your seat and silence your phones as we pull back the curtain on personal finance. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Curtain, Money Made Simple. I am so excited to have this discussion today, this really important discussion with Jonathan D. Cohen about sports gambling. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for appearing on this podcast. I saw you on The Daily Show. I listened to you on NGPF, Next Gen Personal Finance podcast with my friend Janelle Espinal, talk about what you're calling a public health crisis, sports betting and gambling. And I have been hearing about this in my personal life from my son, who is actually here today as well. Adam Clive, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, this is, an unofficial bring your son to work day because, sports betting, gambling is affecting young men nationwide at a rapid rate. And this young man I raised has been telling me all about this. And of course, as a parent, you fear everything. And I add this to the list, man. So I really wanted to, as a financial educator, get the information that you have in such a detailed way displayed in your book, the most recent one, Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. So Jonathan, just tell me what's happened from my generation, I'm almost 50. Gambling is like something that happens in the back room of restaurants, and you hear about things and bookies and bets gone wrong, but now it's accessible everywhere. How do we get here?
Yeah, so we have 6 hours, right? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, we have 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I have a history PhD, so asking someone how we got here, it's just an inherently dangerous thing.
I was going to mention your PhD in history. I have so many questions about that too, but we're going to stick to this.
But of course, by law, I have to mention it myself. So how we got here, the really short answer is there was a Supreme Court decision in 2018 that didn't legalize sports gambling, but which allowed states to legalize sports gambling, whereas previously they had been prohibited from doing so. So that since 2018, 39 states and Washington, D.C. have in some way or another legalized sports gambling. And then sort of to your point, not only is it sort of culturally different from maybe your generation and the football, for example, when you were growing up, but then also the version of sports gambling that we've gotten since 2018 is meaningfully different. This is not a room in the back of a casino, filled with cigarette smoke where you can put a parlay down no, probably not a parlay, where you can bet on next week's horse races or whatever. This is an app on your phone where you can gamble a couple mortgage payments on Malaysian women's doubles badminton if you want to. So it's emerged very quickly, and the version that we have is different from anything we've seen before.
And you mentioned the most random sport I've never heard about, like Malaysian women's badminton.
Adam's a fan. He told
me. Yeah. But Adam has said that before, Mom, you can bet on how many times a politician will say the word in his speech. There's a list of things you can bet on. What is this, this accessibility, and can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, let me just draw a really fine distinction, which is on traditional sports gambling apps, that's where you can bet on, of course, sports. You can bet on who's going to win next year's Super Bowl or this year's NBA title in a few weeks, in a few months. But you can also bet on, as I said, the next point in a Czech table tennis tournament or whatever, right? So that is a fundamentally different version, but that is really sort of sports focused. But you're right to sort of immediately broaden this out and think about the broader constellation of American gambling access, which now includes things like prediction markets, which, as you said, offer ways to gamble on the words a politician is going to say, on who's going to be a bridesmaid in Taylor Swift's wedding, on gas prices in Miami tomorrow, on the weather in Central Park tomorrow. So sports gambling is worthy of talking about it. We could spend 6 hours talking about sports gambling, but there's also this sort of broader gamification of American culture such that sports gambling is the thing and is a thing worth talking about, but is also just an example of this other bigger thing. And in a way that sports gambling sort of augured a broader change and a broader normalization of gambling writ large that is not no longer just confined to sports.
And thank you for making that distinction. And this is why I brought my son along, because because this is such a new landscape for, I'm just going to say, parents, and I'm wearing two hats as a parent and as a financial educator. I struggle with understanding when you talk about prediction markets versus sports betting, but I also struggle as a financial educator as how to approach this when talking to teenagers about money. Specifically, I mentioned it to a group of teens who were just recently employed for a summer job, talking about, being responsible with their money and opening up banking accounts and, saving and doing all the things. And I cautioned them to stay away from sports betting. And it was as if I cautioned them to not drink water. Like they were like, what? It literally looked at me like, okay, we'll do everything else you're saying to me, but like not that. And that's when I really was awakened to the fact that this is omnipresent. This is already embedded into the lives of so many teenagers who aren't even old enough to vote, drink, get a credit card, and they're already aware of how easy this is.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but at least on paper, right, except for Wyoming, Kentucky, and Washington, D.C., you need to be 21 to gamble legally on sports. Not to say that I haven't talked to parents who sort of didn't realize what these apps were going to be like and put their app on their kid's phone or whatever the case, or their kid, finds a way to get their parents' social security number or an older sibling's social security number and puts the app on their phone. Prediction markets are 18 plus nationwide. But then there's all these other call it gray market, some cases black market apps that have no age verification or very weak age verification systems. So if you have a 16-year-old in your life who's gambling, unless they are using an older relative's driver's license, social security number, and the like, they are probably gambling on again, not 100% legal, regulated, overseen platform, such that whatever lacking consumer protections are on the legal sports books, and I think there are not sufficient consumer protections, there are basically none on, and I'm talking about things, these are companies that call themselves daily fantasy companies, basically fantasy sports, but actually allow teenagers to gamble with real money. And of course, now gambling is so normalized and is such a part of all the advertising. And why wouldn't 16-year-olds or whoever want to gamble? And okay, lo and behold, actually, I can't get a DraftKings account until I'm 21. All right, I'm just going to go to Prize Picks or Underdog, or I'm going to go to this casino based in Curacao or whatever because it's totally illegal and I can just bet through crypto. So the thesis of the book, right, is that it basically didn't have to be this way, is that the specific way we rolled out sports gambling was unnecessarily reckless and dangerous. And this is a manifestation of that, is that this is a classic American story, is we went as fast as possible, as hard as possible, as big as possible with sports gambling, not realizing that, now we're just raising the profile of gambling and all these people who actually can't legally gamble are going to want to do it. And all these companies are going to come to meet that demand.
I'm letting Adam burst in here because I think his tail is wagging.
So I'd love to piggyback off of what you said. You mentioned cryptocurrencies. And so I would like to talk about how a lot of people my age that are not into sports betting have sort of a moral stance against it and want to be like, I do not sports bet. I will not be a part of that. I have an addictive personality. I want to stay away from that. However, these people are the same people that are then going online and putting ridiculous calls and puts on stocks, gambling into cryptocurrencies that are extremely dangerous, and investing on meme stocks. And so this is more into the weeds of like what gambling has become beyond the word gambling. What have you found is like, how has this affected individuals like well-being as far as trying to avoid the word gambling, but still ending up gambling because of all of these other ways of doing so? Yeah,
right. So I mean, just think about the history of American finance, right? There's sort of always been a thin line between what we'd call gambling, investing, and let's call it speculation, right?
There's been a lot of investing platforms that have transitioned a little bit more into the gambling sphere. How have you seen that affect sports betting? Because I think this is an extremely predatory word of prediction markets instead of gambling. Like, how does that affect when, this is a place that is touted as being a safe place to put your 401k, and now is something where you can bet, you can predict on the Cowboys. You're not gambling, you're predicting the same way that you predict that Google will increase 10% next year. Like, right. How is that?
So this is, to me, embodies what the total erasure of any line or any semblance of the rest of the line between gambling and investing is the fact that you can buy an Eagles parlay, quote unquote, buy an Eagles, quote unquote, invest in an event contract on the Eagles, aka gamble on the Eagles, through the same app where you manage your 401k. So that to me is dangerous. So the way to make gambling safer to me is to introduce this concept of friction, right? Is to make it harder to get money into the app, easier to get money out of the app. And even if it's not literally possible to put an Eagles parlay into your 401k, the fact that you have to put the money in that it's all happening in the literal same app, and you are pretending that buying Google stock is the same as buying an Eagles parlay, that is just a total. This is like more than just the normalization of gambling. This is like like Julie, the America you grew up with, like with its sort of cultural aversion to gambling. This is like going so far in the opposite direction of endorsing it, normalizing it, and equating it with actual investing. That how can I don't mean to sound simplistic, but how can this not lead to disaster? And
right.
As Julie probably knows, there are already I think 17% of Americans who retire with no save or have no savings for retirement. And how can this not just sort of over time increase that number if a generation of young people is going to just be gambling all their money instead of investing it in stocks and bonds from a young age?
And also, I mean, how do you know, you don't know what you don't know. And I feel like parents like me don't know that this exists, don't know that their kids are accessing this, don't know that they're potentially developing an addiction that is as strong as you've written, as strong as an alcohol or drug addiction before they even have access to their own money. How do we as families financially prepare to rescuing our grown children as they have become, addicted to gambling? And I think that this is you're saying this is a public health crisis. I feel like this podcast serves as almost like a
public service announcement.
Public service announcement. Thank you. A public service announcement. This is what, your kids are doing, and you don't, in particular your sons, are doing on their phones. And just even the fact that you said yes to doing this podcast when I'm sure you have lots of opportunities to talk about this, but it says to me that you clearly want to get this out here. You clearly want to solve this problem. So you're talking about friction. Talk more about that, because I talk about that in financial education. Take your credit cards off of your phone and off of the apps. Make it harder for yourself. Set yourself up at 24 hours. You don't buy what's in your Amazon cart. That creates friction. So tell me how you think friction could help mitigate this crisis.
No, it's the same idea as so many of the ideas you're laying out, which is the problem. And so just to be really clear, also to the point you're making, addiction is really a right tail case. It's a really, really sort of dramatic case, and we hope sort of only a relatively small percentage of people who participate in these products are going to get addicted. All that to say is there's a lot of people who I suspect, or we have data to show, who are going to run into trouble, who won't actually develop a full-blown addiction, who might have a couple weeks, a couple months, or whatever when they gamble more than they can afford, they gamble more than they can intend, they have a bad experience. They're not addicted. Their dopamine pathways aren't rewired per se, but they something bad happens to them, or they lose more money than they want, or than they were supposed to. And so that to me is also sort of emblematic of harm. I'm sure you would agree, but that is not doesn't fall into the category of addiction. So all this to say is my goal is to sort of stop that process and stop someone either from getting addicted or from even sort of on a more short-term, sort of less serious basis running into trouble. And that would be things sort of like you're saying with Amazon, sort of slowing it down, right? I think a clear indicator of harm, both an indicator of harm and a clear way the snowball can start rolling down the hill and start getting bigger and building up more velocity, is through what's called loss chasing, which is I bet on the Knicks, I lose. Oh shoot! Okay, I'm going to double up on the Sacramento Kings. I'm going to get it back. Oh shoot! I lost again. All right, I'm going to go to Dutch handball. I'm going to double up again, and so on. And so not only are you acclimating yourselves to gamble with larger amounts of money because you're sort of chasing your losses, your sort of dopamine pathways, you're chasing. I mean, quite literally, and you're sort of seeking the joy that you think you will get when you sort of do win that last one, and it does sort of pay off all the previous debts. So I mean, there's all sorts of ideas I have about friction, but that to me is sort of the first one, is slowing down the process by which someone can engage in loss chasing. So, I mean, for example, you deposit money into your sports betting account. Let's say it goes into a cooler. You have to wait 12 to 24 hours before you can gamble with it. So you can't sort of rapid fire deposit money into your account, gamble with it, lose, deposit more, gamble with it, lose, and so on. there's also the problems with sports betting actually when it comes to that, because what's to stop me from, okay, I have money in a cooler and FanDuel, but my DraftKings account is ready to go. And so there's all these other problems there. But that, generally speaking, is an example of friction and the type of things that the apps don't offer that I think we should require or should be required of them.
Just as a personal anecdote, I have watched someone do this, like a friend of mine. I've watched someone take $20, lose it, go to 40, lose it, go to 80, up to like $600. And it's like, if they had lost that last one, it would like, they wouldn't have been able, they would have just lost $600 continuously sports betting all night. I mean, thank God they won the last one for, I mean, that's the horror stories. You don't want to tell
the
people
system
like
works.
they did
Yeah,
make it
sports
out.
betting is great. Yeah.
They made it out. But like, they took it that night and they deleted it from their phone. And next week I was talking to them and they were sports betting on it again. And I was like, we just went, like, it's this addiction. It's like you see the horror that comes from it and then it's right back to it the next week. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask you another question about specifically, like you mentioned young men, especially. And so I see a lot of people, there's a lot of interesting financial decisions young people are making right now because of like this financial nihilism of the economy. I'll never own a house, so I might as well DoorDash a $30 burrito to my house. And there's a lot of this that's happening in that. And then also sports betting, like it's just $20 anyway. This could be my road to owning a house someday or more than that. Can you talk to a little bit about like how that effect has affected young men? I know you speak a lot about young men, so I wanted to get onto that topic.
Yeah. Well, let me just say first, I think this is reflective. The financial nihilism, which is a phrase I borrowed from Kyla Scanlon, right? Which is what you're describing, right? This sense that you're not going to be able to buy a house or whatever, so you might as well gamble with the money that you do have. That it's reflected, just if folks are looking for proof of gambling as an example of financial nihilism, right? In the way that young men in particular have been choosing to bet, right? The joke wasn't for a long time that in Las Vegas, you had to gamble $110 to win 100, and that $10 is what kept the lights on in Las Vegas. But the way young people bet these days aren't like, okay, I'm going to bet on the Knicks to win, I'm going to bet 100 to win, or bet 110 to win 100. You bet on parlays, right? Which are these sort of long sequential bets where you need Giannis Antetokounmpo to get 5 rebounds. You need Damian Lillard to get six points. You need LeBron James to have 5 assists and so on. Each of those sort of lines exactly has to hit exactly as it is. All of them has to hit. And if they do, you can, by compounding sort of more and more and more lines into your parlay, you can all of a sudden go from betting $110 to win 100 to betting $100 to win $100,000 or $1 million. Of course, your odds have sort of declined dramatically. Casinos love, or sportsbooks love parlays because they're just so dumb and because people just lose money so much faster. But just to your point, Adam, the rate of parlay uptake and the what's called the hold, right? The percentage of every bet that the casino takes home to like wash themselves in gold coins at the end of the day has gone up because the percentage of people who have been using parlays has gone up. I think specifically because of this sort of financial nihilism. And we can talk about sort of other demographic and socioeconomic factors that I think are driving young men toward parlays and toward this financial nihilism. But if you're just looking for proof as to how it is manifest in sports gambling, I think parlays, we can't really talk about sports betting anymore without talking about parlays, because that's how young people are gambling these days.
Yeah, I mean, I personally completely agree. I've seen so many people trying to watch their parlays, 17 legs turn, 10 cents into $50,000. I mean, I watch my cousins do it. I watch it's everywhere.
And it's so fun. I don't blame it. It really, like, sports gambling is fun, and we shouldn't lose sight of that fact. And especially as we think about sort of why people are driven to it. And it is insanely exciting to like theoretically have $1 million on the line because of some random college basketball game happening at 3 a.m. because you've already hit the first 7 legs of your parlay. But of course, it is sort of, to the example of your friend earlier, it is also so they're doomed to fail, right? They're doomed to lose money, and they're doomed to think, oh, I hit 7 out of 8. Like, I was so close. Whereas of course, hitting 7 out of 8 is the same as hitting 0 out of 8, but you can sort of delude yourselves into thinking, oh, I was only 1 Powerball number away. Like, you were not 1 Powerball number away. That's the same as being 7 Powerball numbers away. So, but it is sort of setting people up for false expectations, for these sort of rewiring of their brain chemistry to incline them towards gambling and to desensitize them toward gambling and to see gambling as the sort of one-stop shop solution for all the problems in their lives, when of course it is more likely to exacerbate those problems than it is to solve them.
Yeah, and one question I had for that, because I was so shocked whenever I listened to your interview. I listened to a couple of your interviews, I read a couple of your articles, and I was so shocked that you were so with the idea of like, yes, sports betting is exciting and there is a way to do it. And so my question for you is like, as someone who's become a real expert in this field, and, I'm living in this society that, all of these regulations that hopefully will come into place might happen within the next, 5 years, 10 years. So I'm living in the now of 2026. What do you recommend sitting in front of a 21-year-old who's watching all of his friends' sports game? Like, what do you recommend is healthy? What do you recommend is the right thing to do? I mean, I know that's such a hard question.
Yeah, what do I know about 21-year-olds these days? I'm like 35. I mean, so that's just I'm trying to approach with some humility. No, but I think I would hope that an awareness of how these apps work and how sort of insidious they can be, I think would be a helpful starting point, right? Is that it's not a coincidence that a Celtics parlay is on the front of your DraftKings page or whatever. Like, they know you like the Celtics. They know how to lure you in. It's not out of the goodness of their heart that they're sending you an email on your payday, sort of reminding you or with a deposit bonus, right? It is sort of self-interested. So I think once it's seen as, oh, this is such an adult, mature activity that I'm doing when I'm gambling, to, oh, this is a casino, like bilking or taking my money. I think that would sort of change the framework. And I do think, like, genuinely, I do think sports gambling is fun and can be fun. And I don't want to sort of be a scold, not just because I don't want to be a scold, but because I also think if we start just reflexively banning everything that people find fun just because it can be harmful, we wouldn't have the internet, we wouldn't have like anything. So, for example, just to the case of your friend, being on guard for loss chasing and for setting limits, I think is a really helpful place. The apps, the benefit, this is a genuine benefit of the legal regulated market, is that they have these options for sort of self limits. Unfortunately, you have to opt into them. They're not default opt out, which of course they should be default opt out rather than default opt in. But whatever. And studies show, by the way, that there's extremely small uptake rates, like a vanishingly small percentage of users actually use these things. But I would say if you're going to gamble, you actually should use them. Like, you should set a time limit for the amount of time you can use a gambling app. You should set a deposit limit for how much money you can deposit into an app over the course of a month or a day or whatever the case may be. Because you should know, you young person who I'm talking to, you should know that it's actually not your fault. Like, if you start gambling and you start sort of chasing your losses, it's not like there's something in your brain that sort of wants to do this. And it's one thing, the Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Like, yeah, okay, I'm only going to gamble $20. Okay, wait until you lose that $20 and then see how you're going to feel. So setting some artificial limits in advance. Of course, I'm not. No one's going to download Facebook and be like, "Oh, okay, I've downloaded Facebook. Let me set an app limit or my time limit on my Facebook app." Like, I understand that it's sort of not realistic that folks are going to sort of do this premeditatively and preemptively, but generally, I actually think that is sort of the right solution, is for people to have limits on themselves that they go into this process having already established.
Yeah, that it is so scary to think about it that way, because I know friends who understand everything you just said, like, or to an extent, everything that you just said about how predatory these sites already are, and still with that knowledge keep going with it. And that's why, like, I'm hopeful for what you're saying. These barriers, I really hope that they get in. But like, again, for the 2026, in which I mean, hopefully, maybe there'll be some kind of change in these systems, but for like the remainder of this year, what do these people do who already know but still do it anyway to a not fun level, if that makes sense? They're not doing it for fun anymore. And
no, so, it's hard, and I'm not a clinician, right? And I don't know, if these folks would qualify or would need actual treatment per se. Anyway, but I would say part of it, not to toot your horns, but like part of it actually is having sort of conversations like these and normalizing it and making folks sort of making the Adams, or I guess it's not you, Adam, but like making your friends of the world sort of aware that they are not suffering, or make them not have to suffer in silence, that they are not alone in this respect, that this app has been engineered to produce this outcome, and that they are sort of a victim rather than someone who just doesn't have sufficient self-control.
Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. In the show notes, we'll have access to how to get that. Also, just you in general, Jonathan. But any parting things before I do my rapid fire questions?
It didn't have to be this way, and it still doesn't have to be this way. And I think that we, in many cases, as I've said, are sort of still in the early stages. And I think there is time for parents to quote unquote fight back. And I think especially that's important because we shouldn't wait for Congress, especially to save us, not to mention sort of state lawmakers. So Adam's talking about regulation. I think it's going to happen at some point, but I wouldn't count on it. And as Adam was saying, there are people who are running into trouble right now. And I think as sort of watered down as it might feel to be like, oh, we need to talk about it or we need to change our culture. It's just like the laws aren't going to change on their own and the industry has no incentive to change on its own. So it is left up to us, at least in the short term, to do something about it as sort of frustrating as that might be.
Yeah. Well, we have to take action. So thank you. Thank you for all your work on this. Thanks, Adam, for the amazing questions. Hold on. Well, we listened to Jonathan's quick rapid fire, behind the curtain, Money Made Simple, rapid fire questions. Okay. Here we go. What is your favorite word?
I think oblivious, just for the connotation and for just how it sounds.
What is your least favorite word?
No, because I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, so I hear it all the time.
Good point. What is your theme song, like your walk-up song, if you had one?
Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run live in the Meadowlands, August 1984, which is the version on the live 1975 to 1985 box album.
The most specific answer I've ever gotten. I love it. What is your most used emoji?
Probably thumbs up because by law, I'm going to approve everything my wife texts me.
Smart move.
Yeah.
What gets you motivated to do the work that you do?
I guess the aforementioned 4-year-old and 1-year-old, but I confess that I've been into gambling and interested in gambling policy for before then. So I think my sort of animating political event as a young person was the Great Recession, and sort of my interest was in themes of the American dream and economic inequality, and I sort of fell into gambling from there. This is no longer a rapid fire answer, but that's how I fell into gambling. And now only then did I realize, only later that I have 2 sons, and this is affecting young men and so on.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. What keeps you from doing your work?
I think I have my own dopamine pathways that need to be rewired when it comes to a sort of an attention span. And it's not because of gambling, it's just of general internet, and hence the physical RFD device that I use to block access to my phone and things like that.
Well, you're creating your own friction. You're doing the work, talking
exactly.
about it and doing it. I love it. I love it. What is money advice that you would like to erase from your memory?
I don't know where this came from, but I am one of those people. I have so much more in cash than I need to at all times. Just like from a rainy day fund, like probably a year's worth of our mortgage payments or something, just like sitting in cash. It's like, why? But I just like feel, I don't know, an anxiety or some hesitation about like investing that when I know I should at least be putting it in like the bond market or something.
Right. Okay.
I don't know where it came from, but I would like to get rid of it.
It probably came from your childhood or something. That's so interesting. What's money advice you received that you wished you had known sooner?
Getting your money out of cash. Yeah, I think that's probably it. And again, not to say that I'm doing a great job of following it, but we're at least we're like I'm moving more of our money into index funds, and at least it's like growing and it's growing slowly. But at least it's sitting there invested in something rather than just sitting in cash.
Nice. And lastly, give our listeners a challenge. What is something that they could do or start today that could change their financial lives?
Their financial lives.
Or their lives in general.
Well, they could lose $10,000 on the Houston Rockets. That would change your financial lives, certainly.
Maybe in a good way.
Yeah. Well.
Or a warning.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I'm like sort of joking, but sort of not. Like parents, especially, like they should try gambling, or they should like look at these apps and sort of understand the enticement, and should understand like what the young person in their lives is engaging in. And I'm not saying you should bet $10,000 on how long the next White House press conference is going to be, which of course you could if you wanted to. But I think that actually we'd all be sort of well served by understanding the challenges facing young people in sort of a real way, in a real empathetic way, rather than just sort of imagining this boogeyman that some guy on the podcast described for you or whatever.
I totally agree. You have to like be in someone's shoes to be empathetic. And it's one thing to just pass judgment without knowing, the everyday pressures.
Right. Or say,
and the
just
everyday
stop,
access.
Adam, it's
exactly.
so easy. But you actually have no idea how easy it is because you have no idea what the apps look like and how they work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, this has been great. Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and illuminating this topic for so many of us, even though many of us don't even want to know, but we're like, oh no, another thing to parent about. Like we needed that. But it's been great. And Adam, thank you so much for coming on and being, the test case and the other, the living expert on this, because, I am not a young man, and I needed you here today to represent and ask the question. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was awesome. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks, Julie.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Behind the Curtain, Money Made Simple. If you liked what you heard, if you learned something, subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend, because good financial education deserves a standing ovation. And remember, you don't have to know all the steps before you take the stage. You just need the courage to show up, ask questions, and maybe, just maybe, sing a little bit along the way. I'm Julie Beckham, and Behind the Curtain, Money Made Simple is brought to you by Rockland Trust, member FDIC, the bank where each relationship matters, because we want you to have a healthy relationship with money at any age.